So, yep, that started recording now. So again, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, I had a real think about the organization, the mission and purpose, also the context we're in, and thinking about where I think the real opportunity is. So, I'm hoping to share that with you. Before we get into that, I kind of wanted to start off by leveraging what I think could be a good opportunity, which is me. So, yeah, I've had, I think, a really interesting journey in my life. So, just to give you a starting point, I'm Ghanaian, and that informs a lot of me and my culture and kind of my principles. But more importantly for me, I'm also Christian, and I think regardless of our kind of religious persuasions here, it's given me really strong values of servitude. So even in leadership positions, my family and obviously just really great Christian role models have shown me that it's important to lead from a servant point of view. And I absolutely see that kind of coming in with Standing Taller. So I'm really looking forward to seeing kind of how that plays in. But just in terms of kind of my interests and things that I've gone on to do. So from really early on, I loved philosophy. I didn't really know what it was in terms of being able to call it that. But I just liked just the character of thought of it and just how rigorous it was in terms of like asking a lot of questions. As you'll see in the next slide, one of the things I was always told now that I'm an adult is that when I was a child, my parents said that they were so sure that I asked on average 3 times more questions than the kid, and the kid is meant to have asked 300 questions a day. So this gives you some context. But yeah, so I think starting from Latimer, which is the crest next to the philosophy, that's a selective school that I went to in Edmonton. I live in Edmonton, and so I just kind of wanted to paint to you kind of the juxtaposition of some of my early life. So I was in a very kind of BME black kind of background, but I went to a very, very white selective school in the heart of Edmonton. And so from really early on, I think I was seeing a real perspective of different backgrounds, but I was also kind of exposed really early to some of the difficult tensions. So, I had Black friends who had kind of bad perspectives and misconceptions of white people, and I'm certainly the other way around, of white people thinking things about Black people, and kind of me obviously being Black but also existing in those white spaces from age 11 onwards was really important for me in terms of learning how to empathize and to understand where these kind of views came from. And I think that's a really big strength of mine. So I went to Latimer, went to Woodhouse, and then I got into Cambridge for philosophy. And I think that's where all my learnings about, the importance of diversity and just the reality of being Black in the UK really, really just skyrocketed. I mean, it was a really tough experience on the social side of things, extremely culturally isolating. And this isn't me telling you this as a sob story, but just to let you know about how this informs my own context and some of my passions, because as someone who's lived through obviously just being a normal minority like the rest of us, but also a minority of the minority and kind of like in these kind of white spaces, I think it's given me a lot of really key insights. Um, just to speed up a little bit, so some of the like projects and things that I've been most proud of. So when I was in my second year of university, I was requested by the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development to run their first ever TEDx conference on innovation in the finance industry, which was a massive opportunity and something I was really excited to do because I would have to kind of engage on the financial topics that I wasn't always completely like well thorough on, and I was talking to bankers who knew far more than me, but it's also this idea of they bring their specialism, but I can also bring mine. So the coaching side of it and the speech writing and performance, and also just the background of actually putting a conference on. And that was really fantastic. We had the vice president of the bank flew in for the day from, was it Helsinki or something like that, and yeah, I think that was just really good for pushing me out my comfort zone, but also helping me to work with completely different types of people. um yeah, so I think that's just to kind of give you a whiz through, and just to kind of jump to this year. So I graduated in 2020, so last year. which was a bit anticlimactic because we went straight into, pandemic. But I had a lot of my plans flipped upside down. But one thing that I hope will show and really demonstrate that I've worked hard on building good relationships is a lot of the opportunities I've gotten have been because of people just recommending me. So last year I worked with Parlay, which is a partner of Adidas. I'm not sure if you've heard of Foundation, but they work with loads of different organizations in terms of repurposing polluted plastic into commercial products. So Adidas has multiple lines made out of Parlay plastic. So they have like recycled shirts, etc. And so, yeah, I was invited onto this project to kind of redevelop their entire under 30s strategy. So they're really trying to engage their youth market, which I think will be really, really, really pertinent for what we're going to be trying to do here. But anyway, so that's just kind of like a whiz through, hopefully, of kind of timeline of me. And just to kind of go into, just to kind of consolidate everything I've said, I think these are the real strong skill sets and values that I bring. So I've led in a lot of various different capacities, whether that be like charities, organizations, but also mentorship, people, church. So also looking at the more people side of things. I think I will bring a lot of good insight because it's really important for any organization to have a good representation of perspective. And I think, obviously, if we're trying to work with young Black people, I think I still qualify as a young Black person, being 22. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot I think I could bring just kind of from the ground also. Like I said, I ask a lot of questions, but I think that's also helped me to, over time, learn what are the right questions to ask. And I think that's so important. I think we often jump into things really quickly without actually ascertaining, okay, do I have all the information here? Am I right asking the right questions? Networks, yeah, I think I've really focused hard on creating meaningful relationships, which I hope will be able to leverage. And finally, for me, most importantly, like I said earlier, just in virtue of the really broad experiences I've had and the multiple types of people that I've met, I think I've developed a really strong sense of empathy, which for me is not just about the emotional side, but also just that can really help inform strategic approaches as well, because you actually understand the sort of people that you're trying to represent and what you're doing. And passion, of course, because I just think that Black people are amazing and young Black people just have so much to bring. So anything to elevate that would be great. So yeah, that's about me. And I kind of just wanted to start like looking at standing taller and kind of wanted to pose some questions to you also to open up the question. But before then, I was saying to Anne-Marie that, the social context from last year has completely really accelerated. So obviously, most notably the global pandemic, which I think has exposed a lot of cracks and flaws in our structures. But amongst that, in the background, we still have our climate disaster, which is just getting worse and worse by the day. Obviously, Black Lives Matter was really monumental last year, which in some senses, it's not really new, but I guess the world kind of in some way woke up to it. But I think that's going to be a really, really, it helps us to kind of catalyze on this really pivotal point in time. And the global pandemic showed that not all of us experience COVID the same way, and whether that be from a racial side of view, also gender, and women's rights have kind of like decelerated since then, which is sad. But yeah, so just kind of looking from a wider point of view, but also from the business point of view, I think this will, with every kind of challenge, we can turn that into an opportunity. And I think, young people, community, businesses, governments are all kind of ready and have the appetite to deal with some of these challenges. So these are the three questions that I want to open the floor up to and discuss with you today. So the first one is, how can we build your capability for impact? What is Standing Taller's unique role or superpower? And who do you need to bring on board with you? So just to get straight into the first one, I've kind of had a little think about it and, have something to suggest, but I'd love to kind of open the floor and see what you guys have about this.
Okay. So for me, I suppose one of the, oh, I can hear an echo back. One of the sort of key things would be, it's about, what's the word? It's about raising profile. Because in order for us to be impactful, people have to know we're there and also what we're about. So I think we have to be our message has to be quite strong in terms of not only here we are, but this is what we do. Any other thoughts? That's my kind of immediate thought, Amy. Any other thoughts, Simone?
I believe in the power of collaboration. And as Anne-Marie said, you know, we're a kind of burgeoning force, I guess, in this space. And one of our strengths will be why we are unique in what we do. So I think it's really important for us to be able to align ourselves with the right individuals, organizations, as platform as possible. Part of the reason why we're going through this exercise today. And, you know, we'll continue to do this until we get, you know, the right fit of individuals to get our message across. I strongly believe that, you know, there is power in not just standing taller, but standing together. You know, we're great as a team as we are, as you can see, we've got our different skill sets, and when we come together, yes, we can do things. But I think we'll be even greater when we get, you know, more of a collaboration of different demographics, so age-wise, background-wise, just coming together to kind of push the agenda forward. So yeah, collaboration, I think.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. I think I love what you said about standing together and collaboration. I think that is something that the world has definitely warmed up to so much, especially recently. I think there was the tendency for us to always see each other in competition, even in the charity space, you know, like we're working for the same cause, but there's still competition. But I think people are now realizing that no narrative can be changed by one person or brand alone, and it's about uniting people. So definitely agree with that. And thank you for your inputs. So yeah, I as you guys rightfully told me, and kind of across the board, we have a huge wide range of capabilities in so many different areas. I think we kind of collectively cover the bases, and I think for that is a huge starting block in terms of leveraging not only just the skills, but also the networks, the learnings, the experiences, and the backgrounds, and everything that we all uniquely and individually bring. And I think what's really interesting is in like January, sorry, this is just last month, there was an article by Forbes which talking about how impact proof will eat brand purpose for breakfast. And I think the idea behind that is basically saying that, look, for the last 5 years or two years or so, actually, in fact, brand purpose was everything that companies and organizations were talking about. It's about how can we demonstrate that, you know, we're not just about money or not just about bureaucracy or whatever it is, but also about the people and that sort of stuff. But now it's actually thinking, okay, what is purpose without impact, right? What is, you go to 100, like loads of different companies, and you can on their, or organizations on their websites, and they always have a purpose and a mission, but how much of that actually feeds into what they're doing, right? And you know, someone made a really interesting point about that. If you read a company's purpose, how often can you actually say, I know that is Tesco's, or I know that is JD's or FIFA's or whatever? Often you can't. So I think it's thinking about creating that thread and actually just going straight into impact and not waiting for perfection. I think for me, I try to champion progress over perfection, and that's something I think that, you know, could be really useful here as well. Yeah, so going on to the second question, so which I think is a really interesting one, is what is Standing Taller, or what would you like Standing Taller's unique role or superpower to be?
Fitz, you go first.
Interesting question. I don't know about unique or superpower. I suppose the word that comes to my mind is distinctive. And it relates back to your previous question in some ways. Because I think in the short term, I think we need to be in the battle of ideas. And I think we need to be distinctive in the ideas that we are putting out into the world about who we can be and how we think about ourselves. I suppose that goes back to some extent to the conversations that we were having collectively about actually creating this thing called Standing Taller. And it was, and I'm sure this is a phrase you've come across in a number of contexts, about changing the narrative. Mm-hmm. That if you're looking at tackling knife crime, youth violence, ultimately you're working to have young people, young men particularly, literally think differently about themselves, to tell themselves a different story about themselves. And there's an argument that says that there's a need for that across the community as a whole. If you're thinking about African diaspora communities, Black communities in the UK, the potential and the capability is limitless, the impact is limited. And that is often directly related to our social and economic and political capital. But that in turn, I think, is related to, how do we speak about ourselves and our possibilities? So I think there's a space for ideas about what is it possible for us to be, some of which means challenging some of the dominant ideas about how we think about ourselves. And it seems to me in the short term, that's a space that we could usefully be in. And I say in the short term, because if that works, that will trigger other activities, other ideas, other areas of focus that I don't think we can necessarily specify just yet. But for me, what I'd like to see is Standing Taller being recognized as a place where there are some powerful and creative and different and distinctive ideas about what it is to be Black, what it is to be African. And that puts the emphasis on communication and enabling communication, which, given the virtual world that we're increasingly inhabiting at the moment, that feels like a very timely thing to be. Now, I like the audiences that you identify, because each one of those is a potential space that we can venture into and put some ideas in, and we'll be known as much by our fellow travelers. Who else can we co-opt to speak on our behalf in our favor so that we become known? Yeah, is all that making sense?
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of really interesting things you said there. I think the one that I would love to pick up on is the idea of, you spoke about kind of almost creating an idea hub, right? Where you're kind of creating ideas and channeling and also welcoming it, because there are probably lots of people who are hungry and want to do things, but perhaps don't have the space for that to be mobilized. So I mean, I was just kind of looking and reflecting on your mission, and I guess missions obviously over time to evolve, but I think it's a great starting point and that sort of stuff. And so your mission so far is to strive to shape a fresh narrative with new perspectives and to change the public dialogue around young disadvantaged people of color. I think for me, what I'm loving is, obviously, from a narrative point of view, is that this is wider than just, sometimes doing acts in isolation can over time kind of lose its impact if we don't change the wider discourse, right? And the private conversations they're having in boardrooms and X country, hopefully if we're able to kind of inject some realism into that, then we're making much, much wider impact than just where we are here. So I think Victoria, what you said about the communication and ideas hub, I think that's a really great thing. And definitely something that I think we could have a real kind of unique selling point, and kind of like opportunity to really dig deeper into. But if you'll let me humbly also kind of like put my 2 pence in,
Yeah.
I think it's as well as changing narrative, I think we kind of want to also, alongside it, be doing things. And I say this because so many people talk the talk and do all of this, but like actually, how are you channeling that and putting that into place? And so my addition would be also, you know, be a catalyst for change, because so far everything about right now is about how we're changing conversation, but how are we actually also changing, you know, situations, changing people, changing circumstances. And I think we could have, especially with expertise and like the passions that we have, I think that could be a really good point. But I think what's a really interesting exercise is, I'm sure you might have seen this before, but looking at like business and organization archetypes. And you know, Fitzroy, you kind of hinted to things like belonging, but also I suppose freedom, you know, being able to kind of create that freedom for people to come forward and to offer particular ideas. But yeah, I think there's no really one right answer, and I'm not even going to suggest that we'll get there today or even anytime soon. I think it's always something good to come back to and think about how we want to present ourselves and what we kind of want to be known as and what we want to do. And I think for me, just kind of initial sort of impressions were, I think we could have a real angle on champion and magician. So I chose those 2, and I think they stood out to me from what I know about the vision and mission about Standing Taller, because we want to, first and foremost, we just want to champion young Black people, and we noticed that that's not happening, or that's not happening to the scale it should be, and wanting to do something about it. And then also magician, because I love magician because I think it's just this element of not being like going against the status quo and creating things that haven't been created and starting things that haven't been started. It'd be great to see, I don't know what your impressions are, or like do you think, what other things stand out to you and where you think you might want to be?
It might be something for me about liberation. Is that liberation? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if we're saying that they are, if we're focusing on, say, for example, the disadvantage, we want to liberate people from that kind of position so that they are free to, you know, do other things. And I really like the point you made about being a catalyst for change. Something you talked about before when you had your slide about impact proof. One of my bugbears at the moment with many of the big corporates is them talking a good thing. So they'll put the black square up, or they'll say they're for all of these things. But when you dig a bit deeper, they're not doing anything. And it was interesting. I think it was Nike actually, and that's an interesting one because they had a situation where, you know, they profit from Black people and have them as their sort of poster people. But there was a situation where a group of Black staff within had set up they set up like a sort of a group, a network, a staff network for themselves, and they'd created a platform, they created a group on Instagram, and I think it was Nike, and Nike went in and asked Instagram to take it down because they were talking about lots of challenges, bad experiences that they were having with organisations. So the public face of Nike was very, you know, we are very pro all of this, and you know, they supported Colin Kaepernick, for example, and all of that. So outwardly facing, they were doing the right thing, but it was cosmetic. Because actually, my question from my perspective would always be, well, how is it for your staff working for this organisation You're saying all these things, but actually, what are you doing? So for me, there is something about that liberation, so that you can, you can break free from just the cosmetic, the outward facing stuff. That it needs to go deeper for me. So I quite like that liberation one.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about that Nike example, but it doesn't surprise me. It really doesn't. Like, it's but I 100% agree. I think freedom and like kind of creating that real comfortable space is really important.
Yes. Yeah. So that for me, that's quite another one. Simone?
I mean, so many things. A few other headings stand out for me on that wheel: innovation, understanding, and I think you said freedom as well, didn't you, Anne-Marie? And it just reminded me, because just going back slightly, where we were talking about what makes Standing Taller unique and narratives. And I think also just maybe taking a step back and just being unwilling to pull the curtains and look behind the scene at what's actually going on, and some of the reasons why young Black boys who are growing up maybe without positive role models in their lives, and just maybe addressing some of those uncomfortable truths. I think where other organizations, advocacy groups, etc., they have, shall we say, tentatively skirted those issues and maybe not delved as deeply as they should. I think this is where we can really sort of establish ourselves and start to really tackle those deep-seated issues. Because if we don't deal with what's at the foundation of some of these problems, then we're really just picking up the cracks. That youth input, so that we can understand, because there's a whole lot of things that we're not privy to, and we're not necessarily going to be aware of if it's not our reality, if it's not something that we're doing day to day. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Yeah.
So in terms of positioning ourselves to try and do things differently, that might be one of the areas that we'd like to look at. And that, that's I think a fairly innovative way of trying to tackle the issue. It's about trying to understand the issues as well. It's about trying to the crux of the matter.
Yeah, I think what you said about the getting to that foundation, it's tough and it takes so much work, but it's the only real long-term way to make real solution change. Yeah, thank you for your comments. I think I'm conscious that I want to leave some time for us to discuss again. So I'm probably just going to start to whiz through. These were just kind of like the kind of suggestions I thought about how we could, some starting points kind of to discuss where we could kind of go. And I think this is a really, really key point that I kind of just want to go through as well. So I had to think about, also looking at the board, but also just what we want to do and who we need to do it. So I have this thing in my mind of perspective gap. And when I hear, for example, you hear stories of when Kim Kardashian was releasing her line and she called it kimonos, and no one in her organization can tell her that, look, there are Japanese sensitivities towards that. And that's because there was a perspective gap, right? There wasn't people who were, either they may have been people to flag it, whether they listened to it, but more often than not, it's because they just lack the perspective to be able to give a full kind of seamless look. And so, yeah, I think in my experience, what I've seen when I have seen kind of organizations and efforts to help the Black community, it tends to lack the perspective of non-university goers, so people who, I don't know, did apprentices or just went to business or did whatever. Non-Londoners, and I'm saying that as a Londoner as well. I'm not sure. I think Anne-Marie said you're in Carlisle now, but I think you grew up you were in London?
No, I grew up in London, so I'm a Londoner, but I've been here since April of last year.
Yeah.
Not
So
a
even, yeah, I mean, like even all of us here, I think are basically more or less quote unquote Londoners.
Hmm.
But also I say non-West African, and I know that I'm probably the only West African here, but I think more often than not, we do tend to monopolize conversation around like the Black community in the UK. And so yeah, that's just me also just looking at it from a kind of self-critical lens. As you can tell, I am a university girl, a Londoner and a West African. So I was also kind of subtly trying to hint that that's a perspective I could feel. But yeah, I think it's important that we kind of like close the perspective gap. But also in the spirit of partnership and collaboration, I think it's like really important to recognize that what we're trying to do is much bigger than ourselves, and that it's not just about us individually, it's not even us as a collective, but it's about much more than us. And so I think recognizing those people who have already dedicated their entire lives to doing this and are doing so much in the background, I think is important, because oftentimes it's just about mobilizing these efforts are already happening, and also just joining hands and as opposed to starting everything from scratch, people already doing it, so it's just trying to discover. And I put youth workers as well specifically, and teachers, because they have massive insights to the lives of young Black people that perhaps we are limited in. So yeah, I think it's just making sure we're like in touch with the ground. And these are just some opportunities I'll just whiz through really quickly. We discussed society's hungry for purpose. 2020 was a real like catalyst for that. Sustainability is not just about climate anymore. I think, Anne-Marie, you probably know that D&I is now like quite a fixed part of sustainability now. And I think that's a massive opportunity, because now businesses are quite tactically, which is bad, in sometimes in quite a gimmicky way, of trying to do something about diversity and inclusion. But if we can come and say, hey, this is why you really need to think about this and why you need to care about this, and not just companies and corporates, but whether it be like football clubs, and the young Black people that they're coaching and stuff like that. And plan for 22, I say 2022 because I don't know, at the time I was thinking of 22 and beyond. And yeah, and so also just some things I think are like potential kind of risks to think about is, don't ignore intersectionality. I mean, even though we're looking at young Black people and we're like the minority in the UK, there are still other minorities within that. And there's still other areas of interest, like health and well-being and drugs and all of these different things that we need to think about how that affects types of different subgroups. I say don't neglect inclusivity, because I think there's a tendency when you think about any minority that like that's just it. But actually no, like there's a huge, like we're not an undifferentiated mass. We have so many different subcategories. And I said don't boil the ocean, because that's not to say that we could just pick one cause and just focus on it. But I mean, it's just thinking about what is it that we're trying to achieve and stick to it. I think I see so often, and speaking of my personal experiences of where I've just had too many priorities, meaning that focusing on too many things and not really achieving anything. And so that's just something I thought would be good to caution out. And yeah, so this is, I'm just gonna skip this and I can always send it through afterwards. And so yes, coming back to opportunity, I think we can be a real catalyst for change. And I don't mean that just like in any type of way, I mean it in a serious, like, I think we have real opportunity here to do something, and I'm really excited about it, and really thankful to you guys for taking the time to speak to me and to hear about me and my perspective on standing taller. But conscious of time, so I just wanted to kind of stop talking. Back to you guys.
Oh, you tailed off there, Amy. Would you mind just repeating what you just said, the last bit?
Oh, I just said I just wanted to kind of throw it back to you guys in terms of how you wanted to use this time. So yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Over to you, Fitz.
Yeah. I have a question. I think this is great. I have, there's so much here that I think we can act on. So my proposition is, if there were based on what you know and what you think and how you've outlined your thinking here, if there were one thing that you could present to us to say, I'd like to get this rolling, what would that thing be?
There was one thing that I would like to. I think I mean, ironically, I do have a real passion for advancing the non-university route.
Okay.
Because I mean, I could have easily have seen myself not going to university. I mean, obviously, like Ghanaian, so I was always going to go to university with my parents and stuff. But aside from that, I just think, like, when I think about like my family back at home and like just my friends in Ghana and stuff, there is just so much more like openness to academia is the only way, and I think that disproportionately can affect young black people because a lot of times, like for example, white people can rely on their family to make connections for them and for them to go and join uncle's company or do this and that. So yeah, I think that like there are amazing young people who are doing really great stuff in the who have had a really great route that we aren't hearing enough of. And I think, you know, going back to what you're saying, Fitzroy, about the equity gap, you know, part of that is because, I mean, not always, that there are definitely structural, more important issues there, but a part of that comes from too many people going to university who don't want to go and who, you know, who could be doing better. So I think for me, I'm really interested in the intersectionality between that and also how that can really disproportionately affect young black people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would really love to see something through to the point of kind of maybe creating an association or like uniting those many people who are doing that sort of stuff, kind of from a black lens. I think that for me would be really, really important. And I think also it would kind of, to first generation parents, black parents who are worried about their kids not going to university, understandably, I think that could give them more assurance and not and their kids not going to university.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it, other people may all be interested, but I would be really interested in collaborating with you on something in that arena. And I think we could work on what that something could be. And there are several somethings. I think there's a set of ideas that we can articulate.
Definitely, yeah.
I think that there are people that we could get onto an online platform to have a conversation. And then from there, what might the output be? It might be, sometimes those ideas are the output. Sometimes it might be a set of policy ideas. I think the interesting thing about that, and speaking as somebody who works in a university, one of the big threats to university is that, as you said, the value of a degree, certainly for an institution like UEL, outside of certain subjects, is increasingly being questioned.
Yeah.
You know, you will know better than we do that the value of a degree from institutions like Cambridge resides as much in its social capital as it does in the quality of learning that you've engaged in over the 3-year period. Places like UEL, which are the majority, can't trade on that. So unless they've got recognized expertise in certain areas, and that UEL, psychology, engineering, architecture, nursing, teaching are the recognized areas.
Yeah.
Outside of that, why are you really going to university?
Yeah. Yeah.
And as you say,
100%.
as you know, apprenticeships are really taking off, and employers like that because they can mold young people in the ways that they want to without having to unteach them all the rubbish that they've learned going through the university system.
Yeah.
And employers are increasingly thinking the capabilities we need actually can be gained in a whole number of ways other than going to university. So I think there is a really interesting conversation to have about, don't feel that not going to university is necessarily an inferior choice, but do think about what it is that you need to be able to offer in order to make yourself viable in the world of work of tomorrow. So yeah,
definitely.
I'd be really interested in that, definitely.
Amazing.
Can I just interject, Amy? I'm just super conscious of time, and while we're on that topic of including other individuals, university. If I were to broach the topic youth boards, we've had a longing as a group to get more inclusion in that generation. Youth board, as part of the Standing Taller idea, what ideas are conjured up in your mind? First of all, the term youth board, and maybe if you could just quickly share your thoughts in terms of skill sets that we need to be looking
So I can't, I'm losing you a little bit.
Yeah, you might need to be near the mic, Simone. That might be the thing.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, a bit quiet.
So I was just saying, in terms of, I was talking about a youth board and bringing the younger generation on board, because that's something that we're very keen to incorporate into our work. First of all, that term youth, what does that represent? What does that mean to you? And secondly, be able to just briefly speak about maybe skill sets that we should be looking for in, bringing those individuals on board with us.
Okay, definitely. So just to recap your questions, what would I like to see out of the youth board, and what are the skill sets that I think we should be looking for? So I have a bit of a controversial, I guess, response to the first question, and it's something that I really advanced quite strongly when I was working with Parlay on the kind of activating under 30s. And I think if you're really serious about incorporating the voices of young people, then the youth board shouldn't even be called a youth board, it should just be a board. And I say that because once you kind of, disenfranchise, you can accidentally sometimes disenfranchise it and make it sound less serious when you put youth into it, because it's basically saying, hey, look, this is an age, and because of that, they have a separate board. Whereas, for example, you wouldn't have like a black board or a white person board, right? Because you consider that being a really negligible kind of difference. So I would say that this not means the same, we should call it board, by the way, but I think it's however we do decide to frame it, it should be really interweaved and tightly connected to the work that you guys as directors are doing, because in order for us to really implement perspective, it needs to be there in the room. And and I think it just could be part of a way of paving the way, so of making that change. And that's something we did with Parlay actually, which was really good, and just changed the whole discussion and approach. In terms of like tangible, sorry, what was the second question? In terms of skill sets, I mean, this one is probably spoken about less, but I think it's really important that we look for young people who are kind of risk averse. And I say this because, I mean, I think by definition, our Generation Z are like quite risk averse, but at the same time, we are facing very specific challenges that other generations haven't, in terms of the effects of social media, the housing crisis, the fact that many of us are going to be living at home till we're 30 and that sort of thing. So I think it's like looking for young people who are really like hungry and are looking to just do anything and everything, which sounds a bit woolly, but in my mind it sounded better. And I would also just say kind of entrepreneurial in spirit. It doesn't actually have to mean they have their own businesses, but people who are like able to say, hey, I have this idea, just help me find the right people and let's make it happen. And there are so many, like, I think that's a real cultural thing about our generation, which is great, that so many, like, there's just this understanding of, like, I don't need to do this and this and this to get this done. I can do it myself, just so long as I kind of get the right people on board. Yeah, sorry, I know I was rushing through that response, but I hope that's kind of been clear enough, at least in terms of where my head was at.
Yeah. I've got that. Okay. My clock says it's 1 minute past 1.
Yeah. And I got a turn, but
okay.
Sorry to have to rush out like
no,
this.
Listen, no, it's fine. No, listen, at least for me, you've been very clear. I'm getting very clear what it is that you're saying. So I have no issue in terms of the amount of time that you've been taken, and I'm sure there'll be opportunities for us to talk some more. So unless there's anything else that anybody wants to say kind of as a matter of urgency.
No, just really enjoyed it. And I'd really like to hear, so we'll explore them when you've got some time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Really lovely meeting you, and it's good to have some open discussions. Looking forward to picking up from here.
And definitely let's catch up on that idea you were talking about, because irrespective of anything, I'd be really keen to see what we can do about that. So that'd be good.
Fabulous. Look forward to it.
Excellent.
All right. Have a lovely afternoon. Lovely to meet you all.
You too.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Amy.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Done?
Okay, I've stopped recording. I think not quite.
No, it's still so